In this world, 7 gifted children possess enough skill and resources to destroy the world if they so choose. But luckily, none of them have gone a villain arc yet, so they all work for greater good. Up in her personal space station, we find Ringo, the world's top inventor, a dam on Earth Aoi, the world's #1 swordsman, capable of slicing bullets out of the air and winning wars single-handedly. And on that same battlefield, Kana, the world's best doctor, capable of sewing up wounds and curing illnesses that would be a guaranteed death sentence. Then there's the man all Wall Street traders wish they could be, the elite businessman Masato, who owns over 30% of all money on Earth, followed by Akatsuki, the boy who mastered all forms of illusions and magic in the world, allowing him to do things like making the Statue of Liberty disappear for a casual performance. Now, if only he could do the same for my problems. Next we have Shinobu, a master of all ninja arts with a natural talent for espionage. She is the world's #1 journalist, and when she starts looking for something, no search history or chat log is escaping her sight. And finally, Mikogami Tsukasa, the world's greatest politician. And you know he has to be incredible at his job because he got elected as Prime Minister of Japan and runs the country even though he's not old enough to run a car. All 7 prodigies were on a private jet, one day heading to an important event. But in the next moment, Tsukasa opens his eyes to find himself in a bed with an elf girl watching over him. The elf is relieved that Tsukasa is finally awake, but she warns him not to move around too much because he's still badly hurt. Tsukasa tries to recall what happened, and that's when he remembers the plane crash and all the others that were with him. He desperately asks the elf girl if his friends are still alive, and thankfully she says everyone is alright, although the other 6 are still unconscious for now. Tsukasa is glad they all made it out alright, so he finally relaxes and introduces himself to the elf girl. She does the same and tells him that her name is Lyrule, so Tsukasa thanks her for saving them. She tells him not to worry about it because she could never abandon people in need of help, and speaking of which, Tsukasa hasn't eaten since the day of the crash, so Lyrule goes to bring him some stew and offers to help him eat. Tsukasa accepts her offer. When she tries to feed him, the meat just falls out of his mouth because he doesn't have the strength to chew. Lyrule knows Tsukasa's condition will only get worse if he doesn't eat a proper meal, so she puts the meat in her mouth and chews it before feeding it to him mouth to mouth. Tsukasa is surprised by the sudden kiss, but this is the only way he can eat right now, and there's still a lot of food left to be chewed, so it looks like he has no choice but to keep kissing her. How unfortunate indeed. However, before Lyrule could continue, they are interrupted by her friend Winona, who came to check in on their guests. After Tsukasa introduces himself to her, he expresses his gratitude to Winona and Lyrule for taking such good care of him and says he will properly reward them once he gets back to Japan. But there's just one problem with that: neither Winona nor Lyrule have ever heard of a country called Japan. Tsukasa is shocked and can't believe they'd never heard of Japan before because all of them have been communicating in Japanese this whole time. But Lyrule and Winona still have no idea what he's talking about because the only language they know how to speak is Altan, the language of this country. Tsukasa is really confused now because he can tell that these two aren't lying to him, and the fact that Lyrule is a real elf and Winona is a real beast girl, something strange must be going on. He gets out of bed and asks Lyrule and Winona if they can take him to the site of the plane crash. The two of them have no idea what he's trying to accomplish, but they agree to lead him to the crash site. Along the way, they explain that 4 days ago, something that looked like a giant bird came falling out of the sky and caused a huge explosion when it hit the ground. So the entire village rushed over to see what happened and found Tsukasa and his friends nearby. Something still isn't adding up for Tsukasa, because after taking one look at the crash site, he knows none of them could have survived a plane crash as bad as this. And to further add to his suspicions, they see a dragon fly overhead, and that definitely wouldn't happen on Earth. So Tsukasa is sure that they must have been transported to another world. A month goes by and all of them have healed from their injuries, so a feast is held to celebrate their recovery. They all found it hard to believe when Tsukasa first told them that they had been transported to an alternate world, but after all the time, they've grown quite accustomed to life here. All except Akatsuki, because magic was his special thing, and now he's stuck in a world where everything is magical. Lyrule asks them if the world they came from really doesn't have any magic or byuma in it, but Shinobu doesn't know what byuma means, so she asks for an explanation. Lyrule explains that byuma are people who have animal features and strength to match their physique, while the 7 of them would classify as hyuma. And while rare, it is possible for hyuma to use magic. Tsukasa in the other situation reminds Winona of an old legend of the 7 heroes. Apparently they came from another world and saved this land from an evil dragon that had been terrorizing it. Winona's son, Elk, suddenly gets up and yells that there's no way these freeloaders are the 7 heroes. Winona tells Elk to stop being rude to their guests, but Elk is the village treasurer, and he says they don't have the money to be holding feasts like this for a bunch of strangers. He then storms off and Winona apologizes for Elk's behavior, but she knows he is only acting that way because he is worried about the village. Later that night, Tsukasa holds a meeting with all of his friends to discuss their current situation. There are 3 things he wants to address, and first of all, they need to gather information about this country Freyjagard, and what kind of laws and magic it has. Next, he wants to look into ways for them to return to their old world, but they don't have much to go off of aside from that 7 heroes legend. Finally, Tsukasa wishes to help this village's finances to repay them for their help. There are no objections, so the next day, everyone gets to work. Ringo managed to tweak everyone's cell phones a little to allow them to work in this world, so communication wouldn't be an issue, and she also managed to recover her mini-nuclear reactor, so they wouldn't have to worry about electricity for a while either. Tsukasa thanks Ringo for her hard work, but there was one more thing she wanted to discuss with him. Around the crash site, there's a lot of bauxite ore, so Ringo was hoping to create some aluminum from it, but she'll need some extra materials to get it done. Tsukasa understands, so he says he will ask Masato or get the materials for her, but all of a sudden he hears Winona yelling by the city gate. There are a bunch of soldiers here, and they are trying to extort some food and money from the village. One of the Imperial Knights tells Winona that she should show gratitude for their protection, since if she gets on the bad side of the Knight Order, who knows what could happen to this village. So he says all he wants is a little hospitality in return as he starts reaching for Winona's chest. However, before the knight could grab Winona, Tsukasa steps in front of her and politely tells the soldier that he's a worthless loser and they don't want him in the village. The soldier is greatly offended that a random child would dare to oppose him, so he orders his men to draw their swords and teach him a lesson. However, all his men have already been knocked out by Aoi and Shinobu, so the captain is on his own now. Tsukasa asks him if he still wants to go through with this, and the captain doesn't know when to quit, so he tries to slash at Tsukasa with his sword. Unfortunately for him, Tsukasa is well trained in all sorts of martial arts, so he easily picks up the grown man in full armor and tosses him on his ass. He then takes his sword and threatens to kill him if he and his men don't leave the village right now. So if no other choice, the captain and his men flee. It's good that they save the village and all, but Masato asks if this was really the right course of action, because those soldiers are definitely going to tattle to the local lord, and that would cause a lot of trouble for this village. But Tsukasa tells him there's no need to worry because he already thought of that, and he has an insurance policy in place. As the soldiers are fleeing, the captain begins talking about how he will get his revenge on that village by reporting them to the feudal lord. But as soon as he says that, an explosion occurs and Akatsuki appears before them. He introduces himself as a great mage and tells the knights that he can't let them go now that he knows they still intend to harm the village, so he's going to have to do this to their heads. The knights are terrified, so they plead with Akatsuki to spare them and promise that they won't report any of this. After getting back to the village, Tsukasa holds a meeting with everyone, and in light of the recent events, he thinks they should do work around the village to help it out. He still fully intends to return to Earth, but for now they have no idea how they even got here, much less how to return, so Tsukasa says they should make the most of their current situation. Masato decides to accompany Elk on a trade trip, but when they get to the trading company, Masato is disgusted by how little the owner offers them. The man tells him that if he doesn't like the prices here at the nland Trading Company, then he can go elsewhere, but it's not like there are any other trading companies to go to. Even so, Masato isn't going to let himself be scammed, so he turns around and leaves. But before they go, Jacque reminds them that only businesses that receive a permit from the mayor are allowed to operate in this city, and it's practically impossible to get one. Elk asks him where he thinks he is going because they need to sell their products, and there's nowhere else to sell it in this town, but Masato has a simple rule he follows when making a deal. He will only go through with it if it helps him achieve his goals. But at the prices that guy was giving them, there's no way the village would have made it through the winter if they accepted. Elk understands that, but he says he doesn't think he has a choice in the matter. However, Masato tells him he doesn't have to let Jacque take advantage of him like that, and if he is willing to let Masato handle the rest of this business trip, he can guarantee that they'll make a fortune and run Nland out of business by the end of the week. Masato wasn't joking when he said he could make a successful business by the end of the week, because that very same evening he managed to get a business permit from the mayor. Elk can't believe it and asks Masato how he managed to convince the mayor. However, Masato says it was actually pretty easy. All he did was have Shinobu spy on the mayor a little, and before long she found some dirt on him. The mayor has been receiving a ton of bribes from the Deutschland Trading Company to deny any other company that came to him for a permit. That's pretty illegal, so when they blackmailed him with all the information Shinobu got, he caved and gave Masato a trade permit. And now that he's got it, Masato tells Elk it's time for them to stock up. Elk doesn't understand what Masato is talking about since they just came here to sell their own goods, and they don't have enough money to buy stock for a trading company, but Masato tells him to just trust the process. Masato meets with a couple of the byuma who came to the city to sell their goods as well. He tells them that he recently got his hands on a trading permit, so he created the Elm Trading Company, and starting tomorrow, they'll be open for business in the town center. He offers them a deal, and says they can sell their goods under his trading company's name in exchange for a percentage of their sales. Normally he would charge them 20%, but as a special deal he will only charge 10% if they help sell the items. However, the guys don't really understand all the percentage stuff Masato is talking about, so he breaks it down for them. A rug here costs about 450 copper, but if you try to sell it to the Deutschland Company with their sleazy pricing, the best you're going to get is 150. In contrast, Masato says the byuma could sell it for 400 with him, and he would sell it for 400 and he will only charge them 10%, meaning they earn a total of 360. That deal sounds great to the byuma, so they ask Masato if it's alright for them to tell their friends about this, and he tells them they can tell as many people as they want. That night, Shinobu beats Masato in his room, and since she's here, Masato assumes Deutschland must have made a move. Shinobu confirms this and tells him that starting tomorrow, Deutschland will wage war on the Elm Trading Company, which sounds like bad news to Elk. But Masato tells him to calm down, because that just means Deutschland is going to start buying up stock and selling it in the city center for as low as possible with no regard for profit. They are basically trying to push the Elm Trading Company out of the market, and Masato thinks their strategy is a pretty good idea, but it's too late for Deutschland to do anything now. He opens the window and shows Elk a group of people he has gathered, and with their help, he is going to destroy Deutschland once and for all. The next day, Jacque orders his men to go out and buy as many goods as they can, regardless of price, so they can push the Elm Trading Company out of the market. But to his shock, his men tell him that no one is willing to sell to them. Jacque can't believe it, so he heads to the town center to see for himself, and sure enough, his stalls are completely empty while those of the Elm Companies are full. Just then, he is confronted by Masato along with all the people he hired, and Jacque recognizes them because they are the traveling merchants that he fired a while back. When Jacque initially struck a deal with the sea merchant, he immediately fired all the land rep merchants to save on labor costs, and then force anyone who wanted to sell to him to bring their goods in on their own. That's the kind of short-sighted thinking that leads to the downfall of companies, but it gave Masato a wonderful opportunity, so he hired all of them to work for him and signed a 3-year exclusivity contract. That means that no matter who Jacque goes to now, no one will sell a single item to him. Jacque is starting to panic, so he tries to convince the merchants that Masato is deceiving them, and that he will give them more than what Masato is paying them, but they are already aware of that. In fact, Masato personally told them that they would get more money if they decided to sell to Jacque. But they also know that Jacque is a slime ball, so even if he gives them a good price now, he will go back to his usual rip-off prices when the trade war ends. They don't trust him anymore, so they would never go back to working with him. Masato then walks up to Jacque and tells him that the most important thing in the business world isn't money, it's trust, and Jacque threw away all the trust he had when he ripped off his loyal patrons for a little extra money. Masato said he would crush the Deutschland Trading Company within a week, and he is on the verge of doing exactly that. But Masato doesn't think it's such a good idea to let Deutschland go bankrupt because he doesn't want to run a monopoly. So he says he is willing to discuss some terms for the future of Deutschland's operation in dormant, but he fully intends to take advantage of Jacque as much as possible. Later that day, Masato is playing a little game with Rue when Elk approaches him to ask a question. He wants to know why Masato chose to spare Jacque's company, so Masato tells him it just wasn't worth getting rid of Deutschland entirely. For one, their company can't afford to keep all the traveling merchants employed, so Masato's plan was always to scare Jacque into giving the merchants a better deal. Back at the village, Shinobu gives Tsukasa a report on the things he asks her to investigate. First, the magic in this world is categorized into the 4 elements, fire, water, wind, and earth, and it does exactly what you would expect, but people who can use magic are actually really rare. For example, in the territory of Findolf, the only person who can use magic is the mage officer living in the Lord's castle. Tsukasa asks her if she has learned anything about the magic that brought them to this world. But Shinobu still hasn't found much since information on magic is pretty scarce. However, there's one other thing she wanted to talk about. It looks like it won't have much luck following the legend of the 7 heroes. When Shinobu was looking into the heroes, she discovered a religion called the Seven Light Faith that was related to the heroes, but it was destroyed over 500 years ago by the Freyjagard Empire, along with all other religions that existed at the time. This was done so the Freyjagard Empire could have total control over all the people, so there are almost no traces of religion left in the empire. Even so, Tsukasa says it might be their only lead on finding a way back to Earth, so they have to keep looking, even if it means searching every inch of the continent. However, Shinobu tells him that searching the continent is going to be difficult, because the region they are in requires them to get a travel permit from Marcus Findolf to leave, and Findolf is a major jackass, so dealing with him is going to be difficult. Just then, Akatsuki comes running up and informs everyone that a group of villagers went out hunting earlier today, but they ran into something called the Chief of the Forest, and they are in big trouble now. Tsukasa, Aoi, and Kana immediately rush out into the forest to offer their assistance, and they find the group of villagers just as a giant bear is about to kill them. Aoi jumps up and kicks the bear in the back of the head to knock it off the edge of the cliff, and then she jumps down after it to finish it off. The villagers are surprised that she would go after the bear by herself, but Tsukasa tells them she's a master swordswoman, so she'll be fine. Right now, he's more concerned about their condition and asks if any of them are hurt. But while the 3 villagers are all right, Chief Olga wasn't so lucky. His heart already stopped beating a few minutes ago, so the villagers fear that it is too late to save him, but Tsukasa tells them that a stopped heart is a minor issue with Kana around. Kana assesses Olga's condition, and to put it simply, his body is cooked. All of his ribs are broken, his guts are hanging out of his body, and his heart has been stopped for 3 minutes now. But even with all this, Kana doesn't seem worried, so she says she will begin the operation right away. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the cliff, Aoi is still clashing with the bear, and one swift strike, she's able to cut its head off cleanly. And at the same time, Kana begins cutting into Olga to fix him up. No idea where she got all the equipment, but she manages to seal up all his wounds in a matter of minutes, and now the only thing left to do is restart Olga's heart. But she doesn't have a defibrillator, so she manually grabs Olga's heart and starts squeezing it until blood starts circulating again. After that, Kana closes Olga up and tells everyone that he should wake up in 2 to 3 days. Things seem to have gone well here, but while back at the village, more trouble is brewing. A group of knights pull up led by the chief knight, Enzagi, and he immediately orders his men to arrest everyone in the village. He heard about all the money they made from the Elm Trading Company and says he is charging everyone in this village with treason and accuses them of earning money illegally. But after Masato informs him that they earned that money perfectly legally and he has all the proof necessary, Enzagi just says, "Nah, you all are poor, so how dare you think you can make a decent living for yourselves while I'm around?" He says he is going to seize all the money they earned, and he's also planning to burn this building down with all of them in it for fun. By the time Tsukasa and the others finally return to the village, they find the town hall engulfed in flames with everyone inside. The remaining villagers are prepared to run into the burning building or save their friends, but Tsukasa tells them there's no need because they have an expert escape artist with them, so there's no way something as insignificant as a burning building will keep them trapped. And sure enough, a few seconds later, Akatsuki appears in the sky along with all the people who were trapped in the building, but Lyrule is nowhere to be found. After realizing that Lyrule was taken, all the villagers are up in arms and prepare to storm Findolf's castle so they can rescue her. But before they leave, Tsukasa tells them to stop. What they are about to do is basically the same thing as waging war on a country, and even if they somehow do manage to successfully save Lyrule, Findolf could just send troops to crush the village and everyone here would be guaranteed to die. Right now, the only life that Findolf cares about is that of Lyrule, so Tsukasa says he can negotiate with Findolf to ensure the village's safety in exchange for sacrificing Lyrule. Elk is enraged that Tsukasa would even dare to say something so messed up, but Tsukasa doesn't like it either. He can't bear to abandon Lyrule, but objectively speaking, it would be the best way to ensure the survival of the village. And as a politician, Tsukasa is obligated to do what's best for his people. Winona understands that Tsukasa is just trying to look out for them, but she tells him that she would rather die fighting than abandon her friend, and all the other villagers agree with her, so they ask Tsukasa to help them rescue Lyrule. Tsukasa warns them that there will be no going back if they go through with this, but as long as they are willing to accept the consequences, then he swears to them that he and his friends will help them rescue Lyrule. But to do it, they are going to have to destroy the world as they know it. Meanwhile, over in Findolf's castle, Enzagi has just presented Lyrule to Lord Findolf, and Findolf's fat ass is extremely pleased. He promises to reward Inzaghi for bringing him such an erotic plaything, so Inzaghi smirks as he leaves because he's definitely getting a bonus for this. Findolf then tells Lyrule to come closer so he can feel her melons, and Lyrule is being very cooperative because she knows that as long as she doesn't displease Lord Findolf, then her village will be spared. However, her body was so revolted by the mere stench of Findolf's breath that when he tries to kiss her, Lyrule awakens magic powers and zaps him away subconsciously. The blast knocks Findolf across the room while Lyrule passes out from the shock, and after he gets back onto his feet, Findolf tells Inzaghi to tie Lyrule up because he's even more excited. However, before Findolf could do anything, all the villagers get into position around Findolf's castle and Ringo's rail cannon blows a hole through the castle walls. The castle is on high alert from the sudden attack, so Inzaghi rushes to the walls and sees an army of villagers invading through the hole. He figures out that these people are from the Elm Village, so they must be here to rescue Lyrule. But a bunch of villagers shouldn't be a problem for their army, so he orders the guards to begin firing arrows until every villager is dead. However, every single arrow gets deflected because all the villagers are armed with full-body shields. Inzaghi is shocked because a shield that big should be too heavy to lift, and normally he would be right. But Masato tells him that their inventor, Ringo, created something special for them. By mixing aluminum and several other metals that caused me to flunk chemistry, she was able to create a super light and durable metal from the modern world, duralium. And with weapons made out of this stuff, there's no way they will lose to a bunch of arrows. Inzaghi tells his men to keep pushing forward because they still greatly outnumber the villagers. But their numbers advantage isn't going to make much of a difference with Aio on the battlefield. She begins cutting through the soldiers like cardboard, and Winona joins in to further add to the carnage. Meanwhile, Tsukasa and Shinobu have successfully infiltrated Findolf's castle thanks to some intel Shinobu got about his secret passage. They make their way down the halls and head for Findolf's room, since that's most likely where he is holding her hostage. But as they are about to turn a corner, Shinobu notices something coming, so stops Tsukasa just as a blast is fired at them. The one responsible is the mage officer that lives here, Gale Stafford. Outside, the soldiers are starting to lose their nerve after seeing all the bodies Aoi and Winona piled up, and to thoroughly break their will to fight, Akatsuki shows up to perform. While floating above the battlefield, he introduces himself as a great mage and says he has a deadly gift for all the soldiers. He then throws several smoke bombs on the ground, and to be clear, these are just regular smoke bombs. But when the magic floating man says he's throwing something deadly at you, you don't take any chances. The soldiers all give up and run away, and Inzaghi wishes the mage officer were out here because surely you wouldn't lose to a bunch of kids. However, inside the mage officer is busy losing to a kid. He keeps sending invisible slashes at Shinobu to try and take her out, but he has the attack pattern of a level 1 skeleton with arthritis, so it's not hard to dodge his slashes. She eventually closes the distance and uses a magic spell of her own called the fully charged taser to zap him in the head until he passes out. That takes care of Gale, but Inzaghi and some more guards soon show up, so Shinobu tells Tsukasa to keep going while she keeps them busy. Tsukasa eventually gets to Findolf's room and finds Lyrule tied up, but as he approaches to free her, he is shot by Findolf, who is hiding under the bed. Honestly, that was a brilliant move on Findolf's part, but he ruins whatever chance he had to be cool by doing this weird dance. And unfortunately for him, he didn't even kill Tsukasa because he always wears a bulletproof suit and a puny flintlock would never be enough to do damage. Tsukasa then pulls out his Glock and he's got 6 rounds chambered, so it's more than enough to kill Findolf right here. Findolf realizes Tsukasa might actually kill him, so he offers to hand over Lyrule and pretend like none of this ever happened, but Tsukasa could never agree to that. In the first place, after everything they've done, there's no way the Empire would let them go, even if Findolf gave him the pass, so the only way forward is for them to start a revolution. He then shoots Findolf in the head, but only with a rubber bullet for now to incapacitate him. Tsukasa then goes to check on Lyrule, but as he frees her, her eyes begin to glow blue and her voice changes. It's almost as if a being is speaking through her. The being faintly says it doesn't have much time left, but it leaves a warning, telling Tsukasa that the world is being consumed by the evil dragon again, so it's up to the 7 heroes to save it. After saying that, the being vanishes and Lyrule wakes back up. She is confused when she sees Tsukasa holding her, but then she sees Findolf on the floor and pieces together what must have happened. She begins crying because she knows this means there will be a lot of trouble for the village because of her. But while there definitely is a lot of stuff that needs to be done, Tsukasa assures her that they'll get through it together. The first step to building a democratic nation is to get the people on board, and what better way to gain the people's cooperation than with hot bunny girls on stage? Aoi and Kana address the people of Dormant, and then they are here to introduce them to a god. And just then Akatsuki then appears from a puff of smoke. He floats up into the air and begins a magic show to convince the people that he is in fact a god. And after seeing him erase a monument and bring it back in an instant, the people have zero doubts that Akatsuki is a god. Everything is going as Tsukasa planned. He knew the best way to convince people to join them would be to create a religion that they could have faith in. And since they are calling themselves the Seven Light Faith, they may eventually be contacted by someone who knows something about the real Seven Lights faith. While the others are busy with their holy campaign, Elk and Shinobu are out on a mission to gather information on Buckwald. Elk doesn't understand why they had to come all the way out here in the snow, but Shinobu will go to great lengths to get her information, so he's got no choice but to go along with it. Meanwhile, back in Dormand, the public now completely supports the Seven Light Faith, so the nobles of Dormand are starting to get worried. One even considers fleeing the city altogether, but as he turns to his maid to tell her to get his things ready, he is shocked to find that his maid is actually Tsukasa. Heiser is put on edge by Tsukasa's sudden appearance, but Tsukasa tells him he just came here to talk because he had a feeling that the nobles would misunderstand their intentions. They haven't come here to persecute the nobles or throw the city into chaos. In fact, he wishes to cooperate with the nobles since he still needs them to do their jobs. And of course he will ensure that they are properly compensated for their work. The alternative here is fleeing the country and leaving behind everything he has built, so Heiser ultimately agrees to Tsukasa's proposal and asks him what he wants from him. Tsukasa says he just wants Heiser to continue his duties as the city's mayor and pledges allegiance to the Seven Light Faith. The next day, the group's holy truck pulls up in the city square again, but this time, instead of bunny girls, it's Heiser who declares that from today onward, the city of Dormand will be governed by the Seven Light Faith. The people already fully support the Seven Lights, so they're ecstatic to hear the news, but some of the city knights aren't as pleased. That night, Tsukasa holds a meeting with everyone to discuss their objectives, but before that, everyone takes a moment to make fun of him for wearing a maid outfit. Ringo is still obsessed with Tsukasa, so she really likes the picture, and Masato says he will send her a copy for her personal collection. But anyway, back on topic, since they've established themselves as a god and as angels, Tsukasa tells everyone to take a break and leave the rest of the operations to him. But since Akatsuki is their god, they can't have anything bad happen to him, so Tsukasa asks Aoi to guard him at all times, and she swears never to leave Akatsuki's side, even when he's in the bathroom. Kana also mentions that she's running low on medical supplies, and she would like to work on making some antibiotics, so Tsukasa asks Masato to get her the materials she needs. They are also starting to run low on electricity, so Tsukasa asks Ringo to help make a new power station, but she doesn't have enough material for another nuclear power source, so she's just going to have to make do with thermal. Now there's just one more matter to deal with. Tsukasa plans to integrate all the city guards into one knight's order. But to do that, you will need a knight captain, and he knows the perfect person for the job. Meanwhile, Shinobu is still out on a mission to gather as much information as possible, and she's buttering up some Imperial Knights to see what they know. And apparently the Empire is going to send an army to attack the rebels in Findolf, all under the orders of Lord Gustav. After a long day of espionage, Shinobu returns to her room with Elk and tells him what she heard about Gustav. Apparently he's a special mage officer, he's apparently a walking natural disaster, but there isn't much information about how good he really is, so Shinobu plans to go meet him herself, and she's dragging Elk along with her. Meanwhile, in Gustav's castle, Enzagi appears before him to ask for his help in reclaiming the Findolf territory. And Gustav fully intends to do that, but he is disgusted by Enzagi's failure, so he beheads him on the spot. Tsukasa holds a meeting with all the nobles of Dormand to inform them that he's going to be abolishing the current class system. He asks if there are any objections, but even though some aren't happy with the reform, no one speaks up, so he moves on to the next item on the agenda. He has some tax reforms that he wants to be implemented immediately, so he needs the nobles to help him. Several hours of work later, Heiser goes to Tsukasa's office to inform him that the tax reforms have been implemented, so Tsukasa thanks him for his hard work. But there's something Heiser has been wondering about. Since he started working for Tsukasa, he doesn't think Tsukasa has taken a break or gotten some sleep even once, and it has been several days already. Back at the village, the chief is finally back on his feet and Winona is glad her father is okay. But Kana reminds him that he can't go overexerting himself, otherwise she'll have to put him back to sleep. Just then, Kana hears a door open and sees Rue on the floor, barely conscious and reciting math like her life depends on it. Rue goes back to normal after they get her some food and water, but Kana asks what she was doing that made her so exhausted. Rue explains that Masato was giving her a math test, so she's trying her hardest to memorize the multiplication table. Winona and the chief understand why Rue is struggling so much since they aren't very good at math either, but they assure Rue that even if she can't do math, she can still be just like them. But Rue decides studying might not be so bad after all. Elsewhere, Tsukasa and Masato head over to the new thermal power plant Ringo is building to see how things are going, and it's pretty much done, so Ringo's AI says they'll be starting up tomorrow. That takes care of their power situation, so Ringo says she's going to start working on her next project. Masato asks what next project Ringo is talking about, so Tsukasa explains that she is going to make some production machines for weapons, so they can prepare for the battles that will come once winter is over. He plans to equip the soldiers with guns and modernize the military a little, but he's not going to go full auto because he'd like to avoid interfering too much in this world's technological advancement. Besides, he's much more concerned about getting an aerial defense system up and running. Masato doesn't understand why they would need an aerial defense system, since there are no missiles or jets in this world. But Tsukasa reminds him that magic and dragons exist in this world, and a few days ago he got a report from Shinobu telling him about a man named Gustav and his Heaven's Flame spell. The spell supposedly has the firepower to set an entire city ablaze in one hit, so Tsukasa wants to be ready in case they have to defend against it. Just then, Lurl comes walking up the hill and Tsukasa is surprised to see her since he thought she went back to the village with the others. But since this whole war started because of her, she wanted to be as useful as possible to everyone, which is why she is working to distribute food to everyone right now. And if it's not too much trouble, she would like to have lunch with Tsukasa to thank him for saving her. Tsukasa appreciates this sentiment, but unfortunately he says he has an important meeting to attend, so he has to head back to Dormant immediately. It doesn't take a genius to realize that Lyrule just got curbed, so she wonders if Tsukasa is mad at her for something. After all, she was the whole reason this was started in the first place, but Masato tells her that isn't the case. Tsukasa is just feeling guilty because he initially suggested that they abandon Lyrule to avoid this war. Of course he wanted to save Lyrule, but he is the kind of person to put the safety of the majority first and foremost, even if it means sacrificing the people he cares about. Later that night, Tsukasa receives a report from one of the nobles who he had asked to perform a building age assessment. He thanks the man for his hard work and tells him to take tomorrow off and get some rest. But as Tsukasa tries to get up from his desk a few minutes later, he stumbles a little because 2 weeks of no sleep is starting to catch up to him. Just then, Lyrule shows up at Tsukasa's door and she asks Tsukasa if he has a moment to talk. Tsukasa tries to get her to go away by saying he's about to go to bed, but Lyrule isn't taking no for an answer and comes in anyway. Tsukasa is surprised by how assertive she's being, so he asks her if this is really that important. And to Lyrule it is because she says she's not leaving until Tsukasa lets her repay him. Tsukasa tells her she doesn't have him anything because he initially chose to abandon her. Lyrule is already aware of that, and it doesn't bother her in the slightest. If it meant protecting village, Lyrule was willing to put up with whatever Findolf might have done to her. But at the end of the day, Tsukasa came to save her, so she owes him at least a little gratitude. Tsukasa tells her he isn't the kind man she thinks he is. He practically killed his own father after all. When Tsukasa was young, he admired his father, who was a prominent politician. However, one day he discovered that his father was using his power to do some highly illegal stuff. Tax evasion, bribery, ditty parties, he was part of all of it. Tsukasa couldn't overlook all the deception and corruption, so he chose to do something about it and set to work investigating. With the help of Masato of Shinobu, Tsukasa was able to expose all of his father's crimes, and once the truth came to light, Tsukasa's father was put on trial and sentenced to death. Tsukasa's mother still hates him for what he did, but really, for a politician that powerful to get a death sentence, what he did must have been a whole different level of messed up. Tsukasa doesn't regret exposing his father because justice needed to be served, but he would be lying if he said it doesn't hurt every time he thinks about how he destroyed his family. Even so, as a politician, it is his job to sacrifice himself in favor of the greater good. Lyrule grabs Tsukasa by the shoulders and tells him he doesn't have to think like that. He may think it's natural for her to hate him after what he did, but she swears that no matter what Tsukasa has to do, she could never hate him. Tsukasa is touched by Lyrule's concern for him, so he finally gives up and says he will accept her gratitude. But she did say she would do anything for him, so he says he's going to take full advantage of her thighs. Tsukasa lays down on Lyrule's lap, and it's so comfortable that he's sure he could get a good night's sleep like this. but he doesn't want to cause too much trouble for Lyrule, so he tells her to wake him up if her legs start hurting. But as Tsukasa is sleeping on Lyrule's lap, Ringo sees the whole thing, and she's totally jealous, so she runs off and tries to get her mind off it by doing more work. Meanwhile, on Elk and Shinobu's recon mission, they make a stop at a town of friendly people. These people are so friendly, in fact, that they host a feast for the two of them and refuse to let them go a full minute without a new glass of wine. As a result, by the time Elk and Shinobu are both done eating, Elk is slightly drunk and Shinobu is extremely drunk. So Esmeralda takes them up to a guest room and says they can rest here for a while. Shinobu gladly takes her up on the offer and jumps into bed. But as Elk is about to do the same, he is approached by Esmeralda's daughter, Melinda, and she tells him he should hurry up and leave this village already, but Elk doesn't understand what she's talking about. Before long, she's fast asleep on the bed, or at least that's what she wanted the villagers to think. Shinobu has only been pretending to be drunk to trick Esmeralda, so as soon as they are alone, she goes to wake Elk up. But he's still kind of drunk, so to snap him out of it, she kisses him on the lips. Elk is now flustered and confused, but he is also sober, so Shinobu starts explaining to him that there's something off about this village. Elk doesn't understand what she's talking about, so Shinobu points out that all the villagers were eager to hold a feast for them, yet not a single villager ate anything even though they all looked starving. Elk is still confused since the villagers all looked healthy to him, but that's just because they used makeup to hide their flaws. And even then, Shinobu could still see that the villagers were all thin and had jaundiced eyes, which are classic signs of malnutrition. Shinobu has had her suspicions since they got here, but now she's certain that she knows what's going on here, and it's not going to be pretty. She leads Elk down to the tavern basement, and sure enough, they find the bodies of several dead travelers. Shinobu assumes the villagers must be luring travelers into the village, getting them drunk, and then killing them to steal their money. And it looks like that's not all they steal either, since there's a table in the corner with a chunk of human flesh still on it. Elk is sickened to realize that the villagers kill and eat unsuspecting travelers like this, but just as he and Shinobu start thinking of their next plan of action, they hear a huge commotion outside. All the villagers are in a rush because the Imperial Knight's order is here to conduct an inspection under the command of the Silver Knight Jean. All the villagers line up outside and are instructed to perform a rehearsed greeting. But just as they were about to leave, a knight stopped Esmeralda and Melinda because he saw a spot of dirt in Melinda's clothes, and under the law of Oslo el Gustav, all residents of his territory must remain clean and beautiful at all times. Jean tells Esmeralda that Melinda has broken the law, and as such she must receive punishment, so the knight grabs her and starts beating up the little girl with joy. Esmeralda pleads with Jean to spare Melinda, or at least allow Esmeralda to take the punishment for Melinda. But Jean just coldly reminds her that there's also a law that states all villagers must smile at all times to show gratitude for being allowed to live on the Emperor's land. So the knight orders Esmeralda to smile as she watches her screaming little girl be beaten within an inch of her life. Elk and Shinobu see all this unfold, and Elk can't stand it, so he wants to go save them, but Shinobu reminds him that those people were literally planning to murder and eat them. Elk knows that, but Melinda tried to warn them to leave the village, and he just can't stand by and allow such cruelty towards a child. Shinobu doesn't like it either, so she agrees that they need to do something, but she tells Elk to let her handle this on her own. Down on the street, the knight continues to beat Melinda even after she's gone unconscious, so Shinobu calls out to them to get the knights to focus their attention on her. Jean notices the shuriken in Shinobu's hand and assumes Shinobu must be one of the ninjas from the Yamato clan in the north. Jean is completely wrong, but Shinobu decides to play along with it and says she's willing to offer Jean a deal. Even with Shinobu's skill, she probably couldn't defeat everyone here, but she could definitely kill at least half of them, including Jean. However, she tells Jean that if she lets Melinda go, then she will surrender without a fight. Jean accepts the deal, so she tells the knight to release Melinda to Esmeralda, and true to her word, Shinobu drops her weapons and lets herself be captured without a fight. Shinobu is later taken to a fortress where she is tied up in a torture room, presumably so she can be interrogated. She could easily escape from her chains if she wanted to, but she's more interested in gathering information from the Imperial Knights, and it looks like the first one she's going to have to deal with is Jean. Meanwhile, back at the village, Esmeralda has just finished treating Melinda's wounds, so she turns to Elk and thanks him profusely for saving his daughter. But Elk simply responds, saying he saw what's in the basement. Esmeralda's eyes go wide with panic and remorse. She knows there's no way she can be forgiven after what she has done, but she had no choice because this is the only way they could survive. Their village was once a decently prosperous farming village, but when Gustav took over as lord, things took a turn for the worse. Gustav immediately issued a beautification decree, ordering that every road building in person must look beautiful at all times, or there would be severe consequences. The cost of all the renovations left the villagers penniless, and since they would be punished for even the slightest bit of dirt on their clothes, they were no longer allowed to work on the farms to grow their food. They were practically doomed to starve to death, so the only way they could continue living was to steal from travelers and eat them. She thought everything would be fine as long as her family stayed together, but now that it has come to this, she would rather just be dead. Elk tells her that he is disgusted with her actions, however, and he can't let these people continue to suffer like this. Meanwhile, on Shinobu's end, she's a little confused because instead of trying to torture her, Jean actually freed Shinobu and gave her back all her stuff. She tells Shinobu that she is a member of the Azure Brigade, and they are planning to overthrow Gustav because of how poorly he is running this region, so she asks Shinobu to help them put an end to Gustav's reign of terror. Meanwhile, over in Gustav's castle, he is marveling at a statue of the Emperor made out of solid gold. He thinks it's so good, in fact, that he orders Oscar to make 4 more statues at once. Oscar is shocked that Gustav would request such a thing, so he points out that making this one statue has already put a tremendous strain on the finances of this region. In fact, it's not uncommon for them to resort to killing and eating travelers to survive. But Gustav hears all that, and all he is wondering is how that's supposed to be his problem. He doesn't care what happens to those filthy peasants, because the only person that matters is their glorious emperor. He also asks Oscar if the rebels in Findolf have been dealt with yet, and while over 100,000 troops have been prepared, the Rurik Mountains are hard to cross, so they are waiting for spring to come so they can launch the attack. Gustav is enraged to hear that those rebels haven't been dealt with yet, so he decides to take matters into his own hands and launches the Sun Spear at Findolf without hesitation. Over in Findolf's, the aerial defense unit that Ringo made picks up the incoming Sun Spear, so she tries to intercept it with her missiles. But the spear literally dodges the missile and lands right in the middle of town. As the spear hits the ground, a giant fire visage of Gustav appears in the middle of the town and starts burning everything to the ground. Both the nobles and the people begin to panic, but Akatsuki manages to calm them down and assures everyone that the Seven Lights Faith will handle this. Tsukasa already came up with defensive procedures in case something like this happened, so the first priority is to get all the citizens evacuated to safety, after which the group heads out to deal with the problem. Tsukasa had the roads widened a few weeks earlier because of the possibility of this situation, and thanks to that, the fire seems to have stopped spreading, so they are about ready to start trying to put it out. But unfortunately, Gustav still has control over the Sun Spear, so once he realizes that his flames aren't spreading anymore, he releases tons of fire spirits into the city, causing as much mayhem as possible. As soon as one of the fire spirits touches a person, that person is engulfed in flames, and if they don't do something quick, then all the citizens might end up being turned to ash. The source of the spell is coming this spear, so destroying it should put a stop to the flames, but that's a lot easier said than done. When they first tried to destroy the spear, even Ringo's missiles couldn't do any damage to it, so what chance would they have now? Evidently their chances are pretty good because the Sun Spear works by having several fire spirits bound to it, and while it's in the air, those fire spirits protect and propel the spear. However, now that the spear is on the ground and Gustav has released the fire spirits to attack the citizens, they should in theory be able to destroy the spear of the missile. The only problem is that the Inferno is too hot for the heat-seeking guidance system to work, so they won't be able to guarantee a direct hit. If the guidance system isn't going to work, Aoi offers to aim the missile herself, and when she says that, she means she intends to run alongside the missile and physically guide it to its target. If anyone else had said that, Tsukasa would have called them insane, but if it's Aoi, she might actually be able to pull it off, so they get everything ready and Aoi starts running alongside the missile. It gotta be a different type of special to casually run as fast as a rocket, but it's not going to be that easy for her to get the missile to the spear, since there are still a lot of flame spirits blocking the path. Aoi has to act quickly if she wants to avoid those spirits, so she digs her heels into the ground and proceeds to drift the missile. She eventually makes it to the spear, and once she has a clear line of sight, she lets go of the missile so it can hit its target. However, Gustav's visage sees the missile coming, so it stretches out his arms to stop it from destroying the spear. However, at the last second, Aoi uses one of her sword techniques to create a miniature tornado which destroys Gustav's flame arms. As clear as the path for the missile to strike, so the Sun Spear is destroyed and the city is saved from the fiery inferno. Meanwhile, back in Gustav's castle, Gustav has just lost his arms as backlash from the Sun Spear being blown out. But this man is fueled by pure rage and loyalty to the Empire, so he spawns new arms for himself out of fire, just so he can continue the fight to exterminate the pests that dare to defy the Emperor. The next morning, Tsukasa has a phone call with Shinobu to tell her about what happened. Shinobu can't believe that Gustav was crazy enough to fire the Sun Spear on impulse like that, but thanks to the efforts of everyone here, they were able to limit the damage to 1/3 of the city. Although Tsukasa is still worried because if Gustav ever decides to fire more than one Sun Spear at once, then there's no way they could survive it. Shinobu tells Tsukasa that he doesn't need to worry about that since Gustav has to spend a ton of time binding fire spirits to that Sun Spear, so he won't be able to use it for a while. But after an incident like this, the Empire is definitely going to make a move soon, which is why Tsukasa puts Zest in charge of training the first modern gun-firing squad. Gustav orders Oscar to get the troops ready to destroy that filthy city at once, but Oscar reminds him that he already entrusted the troops to Arclight and Buckwald, and they are still waiting for winter to pass so they can cross the mountains. In that case, Gustav tells Oscar to tell those two that if they don't want to die at his hands, then they had better cross the Rurik Mountains immediately and kill every last member of that rebel nation. As soon as Arclight gets the message, he starts marching his men through the treacherous snow, even though he knows it's a bad idea. He admits that Gustav is a powerhouse when it comes to combat, but when it comes to running a region, he's an absolute lunatic. But it's not like there's anything Arclight can do about it, so he continues with the plan. Once they reach the fortress up ahead, they should have no trouble attacking the Findolf region. But before Arclight even knows what's going on, 2 of his men get shot through the head. He realizes that the fortress must have fallen into the hands of enemy forces, and they seem to heavily arm, so Arclight orders his ground troops to retreat so they can send in the armored cavalry. The armored cavalry is cover head to toe, so bullets wouldn't work against them. However, Tsukasa already planned for a situation like this, which is why he gave Zest troops grenades, and no matter how much armor you've got, a grenade is still going to turn you to Swiss cheese, so Arclight has no hope of winning. Meanwhile, at Gustav's castle, he has gathered every single soldier at his disposal and is preparing to send them to eliminate the followers of the Seven Light Faith, no matter how many soldiers have to die to do it. But all of a sudden, an explosive arrow is shot at him because Jean and Shinobu are finally ready to overthrow Gustav, and they've already gotten all the soldiers on their side. Before long, Gustav's castle falls to ruin, and both Shinobu and Jean corner him in one of his towers. Jean tells Gustav that he is being arrested for his treacherous actions and gross disregard for the lives of the people of the Empire. She asks him to be reasonable and surrender peacefully so he can be punished for his misdeeds and amend his ways. But if Gustav was a reasonable man, none of this would have happened in the first place. Gustav attacks them with his flames, so Shinobu and Jean are forced to run around to evade. However, Jean ends up running right into another fireball, so she is burnt pretty bad, but she's still able to fight, so Shinobu comes up with a plan. They both charge at Gustav from opposite directions, and while he is distracted, Shinobu throws a flash grenade straight in Gustav's face. This blinds him long enough for Jean to sneak up from behind and stab him in the back, after which Shinobu throws a kunai at the chandelier above Gustav, causing it to land right on top of him. That definitely did a lot of damage since there's a pool of blood forming around Gustav's body, but in his dying moments, he uses his blood to cast a spell that incinerates the entire tower. Luckily, Jean and Shinobu manage to escape in time, but they can't believe Gustav was really willing to blow himself up just to take them out. Following the takeover, Shinobu calls in Tsukasa and the rest of her friends so they can spread their influence in Gustav's territory and offer disaster relief to all the people who were forced to suffer under Gustav's rule. And considering how bad Gustav was, it didn't take much for the people to switch sides. But there is still one thing bothering Shinobu, since she never managed to find Gustav's body. There's the possibility that it was turned to ash, but she finds it hard to believe that Gustav would really kill himself, although Jean and the rest of the Azure Brigade has been going around claiming that Gustav is dead. That concludes Shinobu's report for now, so Tsukasa tells her she can go take a break with the others. They all go on to have a really relaxing spa day courtesy of the castle staff and later returns to meet with Tsukasa, but Akatsuki doesn't understand why he got dragged into the same massage room as all the girls. Tsukasa tells him he needs to have Aoi nearby in case something happens, since even if the people had accepted them, this is still technically enemy territory. Before they start the meeting, Masato asks if anyone has seen Lyrule recently, so Tsukasa tells them that she's outside helping wash the sheets and bandages for all the people who were injured in the takeover. Lyrule has been learning to use magic under Gale's instruction, and she's pretty good at it, so she's able to remove impurities easily. Lyrule's magic abilities are already on par with that of an elite mage, so they are glad to have them on their side, but they still need to consider what they are going to do about the Azure Brigade. So far they have been on good terms, and it would be beneficial for everyone if both the Azure Brigade and the Seven Lights Faith could come to a diplomatic agreement. But Tsukasa says it will be impossible to cooperate with the Azure Brigade. They ask Tsukasa why he thinks that, so he explains that part of the terms of peace with the Azure Brigade was that the Seven Lights Faith has to pay and rebuild that giant gold statue Gustav made that was presumably destroyed during the fight. However, Tsukasa could tell that the new leader, Conrad, was lying to him about the statue being lost just to get money from them. The reason Tsukasa didn't confront Conrad about this is because they still don't know if Gustav is really dead yet, and if he is somehow alive, then he will definitely be coming for that statue, so Tsukasa doesn't want them to be involved when that happens. He also plans to expose Conrad's corruption to the people at the right time so he can fully swing public opinion in their favor. So with that said, he's going to assign roles to everyone, but before he could do that, Kana says she has something important to say. Basically, Tsukasa and Ringo haven't slept in 5 days because they've been working so much. So as their doctor, she orders both of them to take a break. Tsukasa can't really argue with this, since if Kana is saying it, then he must really need a break. And since he and Ringo are going to be taking the day off, he asks her if she'd like to accompany her on a date around town. Ringo is really excited for the date, so she goes around asking for advice to make sure she doesn't mess up her big chance, and later that day she meets Tsukasa in town. Their date goes on as any normal date would, but Ringo's attempt to get Tsukasa to fall for her fails miserably, and she ends up getting so flustered that she passes out. A few hours later, Ringo wakes up lying on Tsukasa's lap and the day is practically over, so she missed her chance to have a romantic date with Tsukasa, but she's more than ready to try again some other day. Just then, Tsukasa tells her he has something important he needs her to do for him, because with the way their revolution is progressing, it may need to go nuclear soon. A few days later, Conrad meets with his superior, General Nero of the Imperial Army. He is nervous because he thinks Nero will be mad about him overthrowing Gustav, but Nero doesn't seem to mind. He acknowledges that Gustav was a terrible leader, so he even commends Conrad for doing what needed to be done to save Emperor Lindworm's people. But something he can't condone is the Seven Lights Faith. He refuses to let people who preach equality live in the Empire, so he orders Conrad to eliminate them, and to make sure he succeeds, he says he will lend Conrad the power of Tanganyika, a mage so powerful that he can manifest his sun's spear in an instant. Back at the group's base, Ringo has just finished creating their first nuclear warhead, but she asks Tsukasa if it's really such a good idea to bring something like this into the world. Tsukasa doesn't like it either, but if they want to defend their nation, then they need to be able to demonstrate that they have destructive power that shouldn't be messed with. Meanwhile, up on the Azure Brigade fortress, Jean is overlooking the city and vows to make positive change to the Empire now that they've overthrown Gustav. But all of a sudden Conrad's knight, Reisenak, shows up and out of nowhere he tries to kill Jean. Jean doesn't understand what's going on, so she asks Reisenak why he's doing this to an ally, and he responds by telling her that Conrad gave him orders to kill her. Jean is eventually knocked down by Reisenak and pinned to the ground by several guards, so she starts yelling at Reisenak for having no honor as a knight. But honor has no value to Reisenak, so jumping is always on the table. He's never liked Jean anyway, so he's glad he finally has an excuse to get rid of her. But before Jin's fate is sealed, 2 kunai are thrown straight into the guards' throats. Shinobu then jumps down and uses her taser to electrocute Reisenak, providing the perfect opportunity for Jean to jump up and stab him through the head. Jean is greatly conflicted because she doesn't understand why the Azure Brigade that has been dedicated to serving the people would betray her like this, but Shinobu tells her that there's something she needs to see. She leads Jean into the basement and shows her the gold statue that Count Conrad claimed to be missing. This is the gold that the people of this region nearly died to earn under Gustav's tyranny, and Conrad has basically stolen all for himself. Shinobu tells Jean that Conrad never had the best interest of the people at heart, but she can tell that Jean really does care for the well-being of the people, so she invites her to join the Seven Lights Faith so they can create a better world. Jean takes Shinobu's hand and agrees to do everything she can to aid their cause. But just then the door to the basement opens and Conrad walks in with Tanganyika. Conrad is here to show Tanganyika the gold statue he recovered, and he is quite proud of himself since this thing is worth millions. However, Tanganyika seems angry about the fact that Conrad destroyed the statue. Conrad tries to explain that he couldn't find a buyer who would take the entire statue, so he had to break it into bits so he could sell it off. However, that excuse isn't good enough for Tanganyika. He already decided not to seek revenge against Conrad for overthrowing him, since his actions cause harm to the Emperor's kingdom, but he refuses to let such disrespect against the Emperor slide. Tanganyika reveals that he is really Gustav, and the fact that Conrad destroyed a statue of the Emperor is unforgivable, so he decides to burn the entire Azure Brigade to the ground, starting with Conrad. Shinobu and Jean see this, and now Gustav knows they are here, so they have to leave as soon as possible. They run as fast as they can as Gustav begins to rampage through the Azure Brigade castle, indiscriminately burning everyone to ash. As they are fleeing, Shinobu reports what happened to Tsukasa. She tells him that Gustav is alive and he is way more powerful than he was before, so they need to act fast before he does any more damage. Tsukasa agreed, so he warns Shinobu and Jean to get as far away from that place as they can. Meanwhile, over in the castle, Gustav has just burnt every last person, and he is preparing to launch 4 sun spears at the Seven Lights Nation. But all of a sudden he gets hit with a nuke. Shinobu and Jean had managed to get to a safe distance, and Jean is amazed by the sheer destructive power of the blast. Tsukasa didn't want how to use nuclear weapons, but Gustav was enough of a threat to the lives of his people that he was left with no other choice. And if he ever hopes to achieve a true democracy, then he needs to demonstrate that he and his nation possesses the means to destroy anyone who tries to attack them. The next day, Tsukasa holds a meeting with all the people of his nation to tell them that Gustav has been killed by their mighty nuclear thunderbolt. This doesn't mean all their problems have been solved, but is a great step forward to achieving their independence and forming a world where everyone can live freely. Which is why from this day forward, Tsukasa is declaring this nation as the Elm Republic. The crowd is excited after Tsukasa's announcement, but all of a sudden a pillar of fire appears in the middle of the city and Gustav emerges. Tsukasa can't believe what he's seeing because no man should be durable enough to tank a nuke. There is a gem on Gustav's chest that transforms him into a demon. And now the only thing in his mind is killing those who oppose the Empire, so he prepares to burn the city to the ground. Shinobu runs in to distract Gustav, and when his guard is down, she slips away so Aoi can deliver a final blow to the gem on Gustav's chest. It was a direct hit, but unfortunately her sword shatters before she could destroy the gem, so Gustav survives and begins charging straight for Tsukasa. Tsukasa remains calm and pulls out his gun to start shooting at Gustav, but his bullets are having no effect, so Gustav just keeps getting closer. But just before Gustav could get to him, Tsukasa manages to shoot the gem, completely shattering it and turning Gustav to dust. No one was harmed in the incident, so things go back to normal soon after. But there's still a lot that the group doesn't know about this world and the emperor that Gustav served. So there's a lot of work yet to be done if they truly want to build a true democratic nation. Thanks for watching. Want more anime recaps? Subscribe the channels and turn on notification bell.